Good morning. I'm Sherman Stanford, and this is the 132nd episode of Making Sense of the Chaos. Currently, we're discussing the doctrines of grace. Specifically, we're discussing synergism and monergism. Monergism being the idea that God does all of the work of salvation from beginning to end. It's the picture that we find in Ezekiel 37, where he's commanded by God to go and preach to dry bones. And when he preaches to the dry bones, then they are formed into flesh.
Does it look like we're on Facebook Live, sir?
The one on the top looks kind of dark.
Well, it's not supposed to look dark. I don't see. It didn't pop up right away. Let's see. Oh no, that's not okay. It's taking a while to load.
Okay.
It's okay. This can keep rolling. We weren't on live. That, to my knowledge, if it was dark like that, this is recording. This is the hard footage that goes to YouTube, and then ultimately will be edited for other programs. So
But until that goes on,
you're doing nothing. You're spinning your wheels.
well, that's not good.
That's why I'm here. That's why you pay me the big bucks.
Well, so all we can do is wait.
Not really. Let's see if this one comes on. Oh, okay. Put our microphone on. So, we can tell everybody, pardon that, sorry for the delay. We had some technical difficulties. We're remedying it right now. We're still rolling on the iPad, which provides our raw footage. Is that sturdy? How are we looking? That's good. It's not real tight, so don't sneeze, it might fall out.
Well, I'll be careful not to sneeze. We had
Start
some,
over.
as he said, we had some technical difficulties, and so we're starting over. Good morning. I'm Sherman Stanford, and this is Making Sense of the Chaos. In trying to make sense of the chaos, we're now discussing what I consider to be the most significant problem within Christianity today, and it involves the doctrines of grace. What is grace? Grace is God's unmerited favor, and it is unowed. It cannot be demanded, and it must be freely given without any strings attached. Otherwise, it's not grace. If it's contingent or conditioned upon something that men do, then it's no longer grace. And that's a pretty significant thing. Now, monergism teaches, in fact, that. Synergism, which is the idea that God and man cooperate, that man has to come to faith and then ask Jesus to come into his heart, or ask God for regeneration, for salvation, and at that point God responds and the transaction is completed. That's not biblical, and it is the entering wedge of humanism within the church. As a result, as with every diluting of the truth with error, I mean, remember now, if you put dirt in clean water, you don't have to put much dirt in clean water for it to be dirty water. It doesn't have to be all dirt. Now, humanism, boiled down to its essence, is all dirt. But you put a little dirt in clean water, and you've got dirty water. Now, the clean water is the gospel. How much dirt do you have to put in the gospel before it's not clean anymore? Well, I contend not very much at all. And that, in fact, what seems like not very much, this little thing about man's faith decision being the hinge point of his salvation, is a large chunk of dirt, not a little piece of dirt, because it makes the whole reason for God's creation of the universe, of the cosmos, it turns it inside out. God created for his glory. He did not create for the glory of man. Now, if men, by their faith decisions, determine whether God's glorified in saving his creation, because he saves his creation through saving men. Now, remember that. If that doesn't happen, unless men respond first, then it glorifies the men, not God. There's no way you can get around that. So that's why I think it's such a significant problem, not a little problem. It's a huge problem. And it shows up in the church today. Yesterday we talked about some ways in which that happens, and so we're going to go into that more today. Another casualty of Arminian synergism has been the growing abandonment of the shepherd-flock model in favor of a business model for the management of the local church. The way the Bible sets it up, the reason pastors are called pastors is because the word pastor means shepherd. And the church was regarded as sheep. The shepherd of the sheep, of course, was now the pastor. And his role is supposed to be to take care of his sheep. I mean, remember when Jesus, after his resurrection, when he spoke with Peter, and Peter was very disconsolate because of having denied Jesus 3 times. And so 3 times Jesus asks him, "Do you love me, Peter?" And Peter said, "Yes." And Jesus' response was what? "Feed my sheep." "Do you love me, Peter?" "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." "Feed my sheep." "Do you love me, Peter?" "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." "Feed my sheep." All right, so what's a pastor supposed to do? Feed the sheep. But when you abandon that model where the pastor feeds the sheep, and instead he becomes the CEO of the church, you've left Christianity. Okay, this is a significant problem, and we see that in a lot of churches, especially in the mega churches. Okay, what does the pastor have to do with the actual feeding of the sheep? Well, except for getting up and preaching once a week, he's simply a figurehead. He's the CEO. He may make all the decisions. I'm not saying he doesn't do that, but I am saying he's not actively involved in feeding the sheep. Why? Why do I say that? Well, how can one man actively be involved in feeding 10,000 sheep? The whole idea of a church having 10,000 members is just, if that's not a business model, tell me what is. How in the world are you going to take care of 10,000 people under the shepherding of a single shepherd? It's nonsense. He has to become more of a manager, and he has to be delegating responsibilities to feed the sheep to other people, which means he is not feeding sheep. There's no way you can get around that. How is he feeding the sheep? I mean, how can a pastor feed the sheep if he has more than, say, 200 people in his flock? I mean, 200 people is a lot of people to take care of. If he has more than that, how is the pastor the one doing it? Well, how a church is going to be effective in the world if they're small? What a stupid question to ask. Are you doubting that God is going to be able to be effective in the world unless he has large churches with a lot of people, so that it's a mega business model that we're following, not a church model? This is nonsense, but you can see the humanistic thinking in all of this, which is my whole point. My whole point is we've invited humanism into the church, and it's all over the place, and we simply accept it. We just say, well, that's the way it is. Well, yeah, it's the way it is, because it's the way we've been doing it. Is it the way it should be? That's the right question. No, it's not. Well, how do we fix it? You go back to where you got off the path, and you get back on. In many Arminian churches, pastors have shifted their roles from shepherds to managers. Isn't that true? If you have over 200 people in your church, how is the pastor really a pastor and not a manager anymore? He becomes a manager. As managers, of course, they're judged on the bottom line. What's the bottom line? How many sales are being made? What's a sale? A conversion. Now, it's not difficult to imagine that pressure to make sales forces the pastor away from shepherding his flock and toward focusing on increasing church membership. And if larger numbers are the goal, it does not serve the ambitious pastor-manager well to closely question the quality of sales being made, conversions. So, if he's pressured to get more conversions, then he will pressure people using psychological ploys to get them to make decisions. Well, you know, all those years I represented people as a lawyer, it was obvious to me that I could pressure my clients into making a decision that might be pleasing to me. But I understood that if I did that, that there's a very high likelihood that they would have buyer's remorse later on, and the one that they were going to blame for the deal that they made was me. And so I strictly refused to do that, and I always presented their case to them as neutrally as I could, giving them the best advice I could, but without pressuring them to make a decision one way or the other, and letting them decide. And then after they made a decision, I would go over it and be sure that that was really what they wanted to do, that they understood what they were deciding, that they were good with it and they could live with it. Because I didn't need somebody complaining a year later or 2 years later that I'd sold them down the river. I didn't need that at all. And I certainly didn't need them telling other people that I was using high pressure tactics to try to make settlements on cases. No, I didn't need that at all. And as a pastor, you don't need that either. So those pastors who feel a lot of pressure to make sales, of course, it's hard for them not to do that. And you have to understand, a pastor, when he comes out of seminary, a lot of times his goal is not to pastor this particular church that calls him. His goal is to move up from a smaller church to a larger church to a larger church. And so he wants to make a reputation. Now, how does he do that? By being faithful to God or by keeping his eye on the economic main chance? How do you think he's going to get a reputation with a larger church if he's just doing a good job pastoring a small church that's not growing in numbers, but it's growing in faithfulness? Do you think that's going to bring him to the attention of large churches? Probably not. So if he wants to get the attention of large churches, he knows he needs to bring people into the pews. Now, if he works really hard at bringing people into the pews, there's a high likelihood that he's going to be bringing goats into the pews, not sheep. And once the goats represent more than half of the people in the pews on the church rolls, guess who's running the church? Guess who can't afford to make a decision in favor of God and opposed to the humanistic perspective of the goats? The pastor, the rest of the church. And so that's what happens. But what's the entering wedge? It's Arminianism, it's synergism, it's this first wedge of humanism that opens the door for all the rest. If you keep humanism out altogether, if you strictly teach what the Bible teaches, if you never pressure people into conversions, if you make it clear to them that they're sinners, hopelessly lost, and in desperate need of salvation by God, you encourage them to prostrate themselves before God. You never present them to themselves as sovereign free will agents who can make a decision that binds God to save them. I mean, all of those things work together to destroy the church. In those scenarios, the principles of good salesmanship will encourage him to avoid offending customers. Who are the customers? Proselytes, people he's witnessing to, evangelizing. Even though the Bible tells him that Jesus is an offense to the world, but he doesn't want to offend these people. So what do you think what effect is that going to have on how he presents the biblical message? Well, he's going to soften the hard parts and he's going to emphasize the soft parts. Well, how far do you have to go softening the word here and emphasizing the word there before the word is lost altogether? I submit not very far at all. Not very far at all. As a result, what do we find in the world today? Almost everybody that believes that God loves everyone in the world with this bland, equal love. I mean, and he earnestly desires the salvation of everybody. That's not what the Bible teaches. But that's what the world wants to hear. And my goodness, we got all these preachers out there tickling their ears, telling them what they want to hear. Now, the preachers themselves may have been trained up in the very same system. But the point is, if you read the Bible and you go back to what the Bible has to say, it's not very complicated. It's not very hard to find the truth. And if sales are the bottom line, it's but a short step toward outright manipulation, even applying hard sell tactics, to close deals with a walk down the aisle and a profession of faith, without regard to real understanding and real change occurring. Since this is for the greater good of those manipulated, who is hurt? They ask in rationalized self-justification. Hey, we're bringing people in there. They're hearing the message. But what message are they hearing? A compromised message. An increasingly compromised message. Because believe me, goats want to hear less and less and less of the truth and more and more and more about ego gratification. They want to hear about how Jesus is going to give them health and prosperity. Okay? And guess what they're hearing now in more and more churches? In fact, which are the biggest churches in the United States? Isn't it churches that preach prosperity and health? God wants you to be healthy and prosperous. Does he? I mean, seriously, read the Bible. Read the Bible, the overall context, and tell me that's what it says.
It says your best life now.
That's what Joel Osteen's Bible says.
Really?
Of course, he wrote a book with that title, Your Best Life Now. Now, ask yourself this. If you're a Christian and you want in your best life now, that means you want your best life before the consummation, before the judgment day, before you're going to be with Jesus? Well, listen, you're liable to get your best life now if that's what you're after. And so when you die, you won't be with Jesus. You'll be in hell. And you'll look back on your best life that was on earth. But it won't be when you want it to be. This is nonsense. Look, I normally stay away from naming names, and I just talk about ideas. But if Joel Osteen doesn't repent, I got to tell you, he's in deep, deep doo-doo. Man. Him and Kenneth Copeland and who's the guy from Louisiana?
Oh, Duplantis?
Duplantis, Jesse Duplantis. Those guys they're showmen, charlatans. They're Simon Magases. That's what they are.
Wow.
That's what they are. Okay? It's exactly what they are.
Tell me how you really feel.
I mean, other than that, I think they're wonderful human beings.
Other
And
than that.
I'd like to go fishing with them any day of the week. I don't fish. I never got bit by the fishing or the hunting.
You don't even fish for compliments.
Nope. I never got bit by the fishing or the hunting bug. By the way, I have a wonderful hunting story to tell you. This is a great hunting story. This is, as an adult, the only time I ever went hunting. Only time. I was stationed in Columbus, Mississippi, and there was an attractive young girl.
Oh.
I was 20 years old, and she was 16.
Oh, wow.
And she had another boyfriend, but I didn't let that discourage me. And so what I did is I cozied up to her family. And she had a younger brother who was 14.
Oh, wow.
So I got to be friendly with him. And he invited me to go hunting coons on a Saturday morning. He told me to get there early because we had to get out in the forest before dawn. So I did. I went the next Saturday morning, got there really, really early. I didn't have a shotgun or a gun at all. And so he lent me a 410, and he took me out into the woods, and it was really dark. I mean, it was so dark. I couldn't even see him. He was right in front of me. And I kept whispering in his ear, and he kept shushing me because I didn't know anything about hunting. And I kept bumping into him because I couldn't see him. And I think he was afraid I was going to shoot him. But I was careful to keep it the way he told me to. So at any rate, he finally stops. And he touches me, and he whispers in my ear, and he says, look up there. What do you see in the crook of that tree up there? Well, I looked up, and I could barely make out the crook of the tree. And I said, nothing. And he said, shoot up in the crook. So I said, okay. So I fired one round up in the crook of the tree, and I heard thump, thump, thump. So we went to the base of the tree, and we found 3 mostly grown young coons, all dead. And we ended our hunt because we got our limit. And I never went hunting again. And so when anybody wants to talk about being a good hunter, I say, I don't think that you have a better record than I have. I killed 3 with every shot I've ever fired hunting. That's pretty good, huh? 3 with every shot. There's only 1 shot. And the truth is, I had no idea what I was doing. But, you know, God smiles on fools and idiots, and I'm not sure which one he thought I was, but I killed 3 coons with 1 shot.
What do you do with them? You ate 'em?
We ate them, yeah.
What was that like?
But they made a
Squirrely?
tomato stew, kind of like.
Ooh.
It was almost like a courtbouillon.
Sauce piquant?
Not a sauce piquant. This was North Mississippi,
Oh my, no.
okay? It was West Point, Mississippi.
Oh my.
Yes, West Point, Mississippi. I didn't get the girl. but I got the 3 coons. I guess that was good enough.
Good enough.
She was pretty.
What was her name, you remember?
I do. Her name was Jacinta.
That's,
Now you understand.
wow.
Yeah.
Dang it.
I thought it was a very pretty name.
It is beautiful. It means hyacinth.
Anyway, getting back to what matters. There is a categorical difference between selling unbelievers on making a faith decision and telling them that as sinners they justly deserve the eternal fires of hell. You understand that? Even more, that they should plead to God for the gift of faith, confessing their helplessness and sinfulness and asking forgiveness. In the first case, we appeal to man's sinful pride. In the second, we recognize that salvation from start to finish is entirely a work of God, leaving the sinner utterly helpless before him at his mercy, seeking God's gracious intervention in his life. Those are not the same thing at all. Not the same thing at all. Okay? Not the same thing at all. Nobody is going to choose to do the second one unless God has first acted in his life. Anybody can easily make the first choice for all kinds of reasons which have nothing to do with God. Nothing whatsoever. For self-interest, for whatever. Commercial interest, financial interest, romance interest, all kinds of interest you can have to make a quote-unquote faith decision for Jesus. And how many times we see those faith decisions evaporate later on?
Well, I don't feel like it anymore.
Yes. Well, she lost interest in me. I mean, God did.
You stop loving me, James.
His regeneration salvation is not thus a right he may demand from God, or are not a right, I guess, would be are not, from God in response to his faith decision, but rather a merciful act determined by God's grace alone. Do these not comprise the picture of evangelicalism today? Isn't that what you see in the world? Tell me it isn't. The importance of this issue cannot be overemphasized. As difficult as it is to imagine ourselves being content with a creature of ours, deliberately defying us or even showing indifference to our will, it is vastly more difficult to imagine the all-powerful creator of the cosmos being content with rebellion by his creatures, either actively or passively. Think about that. You're God. I realize that ought to be a hard thing for you to imagine, but for most people it probably isn't, because they like to play God all the time anyway. But if you were God, and you make some people, there they are down there, and they flip the bird at you, they moon you, they deliberately ignore you, or some of them, they kind of smooch up to you and tell you how wonderful you are, and then they ask you for favors, but as soon as you grant them a favor...
The genie.
Yeah, the genie in the bottle. As soon as you grant them a favor, they forget all about you until they need the next favor. Okay? You'd like that, right? I mean, you like friends like that even, right? No, you hate people like that. You despise them. You have contempt for them. And you think God likes it? You think the one who created you, the God that you owe every breath you breathe, that every cell in your body was created by him, that you would not only not have life, I mean, all of the blessings, every blessing comes from him. Everything. You owe him everything. There's nothing in your life that you don't owe him. And you treat him flippantly. You treat him as if he's merely an adjunct to your life occasionally, or else you are in open rebellion against him. And he's just over there wringing his hands on the sidelines. Please, please love me. Please love me. Please love me. This is the same God, Jesus, who when asked, what's the greatest commandment? He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your strength, with all your soul, with all your mind. Right? He didn't say, this is the greatest thing that God wishes you would do. It's a commandment. Now we have a God up there who created us, who's commanding us to love him. And yet, evangelicalism wants to paint the picture of God up there wringing his hands saying, oh, please, please love me. There's no please about it. It's a command. He doesn't say, please do this. He commands you to do it. Do this or you die. Do you understand that? You might get the impression that I'm a little upset by this, the way things have turned out in the church today. And it's all the door has been opened for all of this stuff by Arminianism. That's it right there. So if you wonder why am I making a big deal out of this, because it's a big deal. A thrice holy creator God who takes sin, rebellion, treason against himself seriously enough to require the sacrifice of his son to satisfy his justice does not fit the picture of a white-bearded, indulgent, grandfatherly figure who earnestly desires his creatures to obey him, but who leaves their sovereign faith decision to themselves in deference to their autonomous free wills. That's not the picture. Accordingly, it strongly behooves us as God's creatures to pay close attention to what his word says regarding sin and salvation, with special emphasis on who may approach him and under what terms. It is utterly foolish presumption to assume a human being is free to approach the thrice holy God of creation on any but God's terms. At least part of the reason for the physical size and complexity of the cosmos is to humble human pride and contemplation of the creator of that cosmos. You ever go outside at night and look in the sky? Do you know how far away those stars are? Do you know how many there are? That's the God who created you. He created them too. And he created you as having more significance than those stars. Imagine that. Imagine that. Now, an illustration from my own life may help. One Sunday night years ago, when one of my children was a teenager, she hasn't been a teenager in a while, so it's a long time ago. She was having an especially rebellious fit. Finally, in desperation, I took her outside and pointed up. Look, I said. She looked up. What do you see? The sky, she responded sullenly. What else? Stars. How many? More than we can count. How far away are they? Many light years. And I said, you want to fight against the one who created that? At which point, her rebelliousness completely deflated. Ladies and gentlemen, this is how we need to see things. We need to understand that the God who created the whole cosmos created us too, and he created us for one of two purposes. He created us either as vessels for destruction or vessels for honor. Now, to the extent that you have anything to do about this, you need to desperately plead with him to treat you as a vessel for honor. You need to throw yourself on your face before him, beg him to have mercy upon you, admit that you're a sinner justly deserving eternal condemnation, and that you can do nothing to save yourself. Nothing. And just beg him to change your heart, to give you eyes to see, ears to understand, ears to hear, a heart to understand, and to follow after him. And if you do that, he promises he is faithful and just. He will forgive you of your sins. He will cleanse your heart. He will give you a new heart. He will give you eyes to see, ears to hear. And he supplied his word to you already. That's where it is. That's all you have to do. You can't do it unless he does it to you first. And I pray that if you're in rebellion against him, that you humble yourself before God and you beg him to have mercy upon you. So we've reached the end of our time, and I pray that you have a fine weekend. You worship God tomorrow, as you should. He is your creator, and you need to worship him. Remember, though, there are worse things than dying, and the very worst of all is to be unfaithful to God. God bless you.